Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So Friday night's attempted army coup in Turkey failed, and President Erdogan has moved ruthlessly to re-establish his grip on power. He says the coup was, quote, a gift from God, because it gives him a reason to, quote, cleanse the army. A major clampdown on dissent is now widely anticipated, if not already underway. Let's get the latest from our correspondent in Istanbul, Selin Gerrit. So, Selin, is it underway, and is it expected to be pretty ruthless?
Yes, it is underway. The crackdown has already taken place. Around 3,000 soldiers have been detained, including high-ranking generals, and around 3,000 judges have been dismissed from their posts, and many judges have also been detained. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had already said that those behind this coup attempt would be paying a heavy price, and that's what we are seeing at the moment. Many people, though, think that the crackdown will further deepen. The government thinks that the Fethullah Gülen movement is behind this coup attempt. That's an allegation Fethullah Gülen and his supporters deny. Fethullah Gülen is a cleric based in the US, in Pennsylvania. He's an exile. He used to be in very good terms with the government and personally with Mr. Erdogan himself. But for the last 2 years, they're the worst of enemies. Fethullah Gülen came out saying, I have been against coups all my life, and I have played no part in what has happened in the last 48 hours. Today, here I'm in Taksim Square in the heart of Istanbul. It's quiet now here, although it would be packed with hundreds of tourists and people drinking and enjoying and celebrating the beauty of Istanbul. But yesterday night it was a different story. It was packed with hundreds of supporters of the government chanting slogans like "God is great" in protest of the coup attempt. They had adhered to the call coming from President Erdogan himself to take it out to the streets. They were jubilant, these people, because they felt empowered of the part they played in suppressing this coup attempt.
Now, if there was a source of resistance to President Erdogan, it was the army. And I would suggest now that he's not going to take over the army. He's going to have complete control of the army. He was already pretty authoritarian before this happened. Is Turkey now in danger of a dictatorship?
That is a question many people ask at the moment in Turkey, as well as in the world. People who don't necessarily align themselves with the government policies already were cautious about Mr. Erdogan's tendencies about getting more executive powers. It is no secret that President Erdogan wants to change the parliamentary system in Turkey to presidential system, which would give him powers no other president has seen before in Turkey. And now that he has managed to suppress this coup attempt, many people in Turkey fear this could actually play into the hands of Mr. Erdogan and turn the country into an autocracy, as you have said. Although, though, on the other hand, Mr. Erdogan's supporters, as I said, are jubilant, and they think that this was the victory of democracy. And yesterday, the Turkish parliament convened in an extraordinary session, and all the opposition parties supported the government and portrayed a stance against the coup attempt. And Prime Minister Binali Yildirim thanked them and said this could be a threshold moment for Turkish politics. But considering that Turkey is a very polarized country, the politics is very divided, whether the government can actually bring everyone together after this 48 hours of trauma is a difficult task.
All right, Selin Gerrit, thank you very much. We're joined now here in London by the Foreign Affairs analyst Tim Marshall. So let's look back at what happened here. The Turkish army, traditionally the bastion of secularism in Turkey, doesn't like Islamist-leaning governments, has mounted from 1960 onwards 3 successful coups, which returned Turkey to a more secular path again. What happened there? Was this the gang that couldn't shoot straight, or the Keystone Cops?
Both, simultaneously. It was wide, but it wasn't deep, by which I mean there were several thousand, it was in several cities. They did most of the right things, but they didn't have the depth above them. These were like colonels up to 1-star generals. And above them, they had no support. And they made 2 massive errors. They didn't kill President Erdogan. That's the first thing you should do. I'm not advocating it.
No, I understand. It's a 101 guide to coups.
But it is, you know, it is paragraph 1 of coup, kill or at least capture leader of country. Number 2 is shut down media. So they did a 20th century coup. They went to the state television, TRT, and in the 20th century, all media was in one building, radio and television, and you close it down. But they kind of forgot that in the 21st century there was NTV still on air, CNN Turk still on air. They didn't close down all the social media. So Mr. Erdogan, who hates social media and FaceTime and Twitter, ironically, hypocritically, gets on FaceTime, puts it on CNN Turk, says get into the streets, and because the coup is wide but not deep, very soon the call to prayer goes out. They all know, hang on, it's not prayer time.
It's not the proper time.
It means go to the
happening.
street,
Yes.
and within half an hour, the people outnumbered the troops, and at that point, the pendulum swung the other way.
Now, if Turkey faces a serious clampdown, a move from authoritarianism towards something bordering on dictatorship,
yes,
which our correspondent says that's what people are at least talking about there, this surely has huge implications for Turkey's relations with America,
yes,
for Turkey's relations with the EU, and for the fight against Islamic State. I mean, this goes from being a domestic event to one with regional and geopolitical implications.
And a NATO member, of course.
And a NATO member.
He has been, it's funny, we talk about him all the time, but as your correspondent said, this is a parliamentary republic where traditionally the president is simply a figurehead. But because he is so dominant and so has total control of the AK party, that all he had to do was switch from one job to the next, and all the power went with him just because of the atmosphere, not through the law. But he is now moving, he tried last year and he probably will be able to do it now, to move legally all the powers into his office. He's closing down the media. He is now getting rid of the remnants in the army that is against him. He has the support of the mosques. He has a majority in parliament. I see nothing standing in his way. But it becomes what I call a democratic dictatorship. It's a phrase I came up with for Milosevic in Serbia. For example, you allow a radio station opposition to open because you're democratic, but next to it you put 2 massive, massive transmitters for 2 new radio stations that broadcast so loudly that this one can't be heard. He's still allowed the free speech. It's that sort of democratic dictatorship that they're heading for, and he will use all his powers to make it. And remember, there's a civil war with the Kurds.
Yes.
That will just be utterly, utterly ruthless.
This is a hugely historic event in Turkey's history, I would suggest, Shannon, because previous army coups won. He will now take out the army as an independent force and will become much more authoritarian, perhaps even autocratic. Where does this leave Western relations with Turkey? I think we can all safely agree it ain't going to join the European Union anytime soon, so we've scotched that one. But where else?
I think the ultimate dilemma must be for NATO, in that it's a security organization, but it's also an organization defined by certain values and practices. And if President Erdogan responds to the coup attempt by tightening civic freedoms further, by intervening against the judiciary and the armed forces further, then there must at some stage be a dilemma for NATO. I thought it may have been telling that it took 3 or 4 hours, I don't know whether Tim agrees, for at least the US, if not NATO, to say anything at all about the coup. Even when they did, they called for democracy to be upheld rather than mentioning President Erdogan by name. I don't know whether that suggests they know which side their bread is buttered and they were waiting to see whether the coup would succeed. But it is a huge event for the West, but also for Turkey. I mean, the entire state was kind of founded on secular ideals. The armed forces have always been seen as a kind of invigilator of governments. I think I'm right in saying that the Turkish president is never commander-in-chief officially. in the way that a US president would be.
Or even a French president. And many
No, precisely.
people now think that what he wants to do is create an executive-style French presidency. You would still have a parliament and a prime minister, but it would be the president who matters, rather than just being head of state. And Richard, Turkey has been so pivotal, first of all, in dealing with the migrant crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean, with the situation in Syria and Islamic State, and in the region as a regional superpower that balances Iran and even Saudi Arabia. We don't know now where this is going to lead.
No, and there's been talk for a long time about how massively it's in the interest of the West to have a stable Turkey for all the reasons that you suggest. It hasn't been stable for some time, and it won't be in the, you know, even if this coup was a somewhat silly, ill-thought-through coup, it's deeply destabilising and will have consequences for a long time to come. What I'd be interested to hear from Tim is whether the EU has some leverage because of Turkey's desire to join it, that dynamic, although clearly not on the agenda in spite of the farcical things being said during the referendum campaign here, gives the EU some leverage in reshaping what happens in Turkey.
I mean, you just wonder if that's even on his mind. Because
it won't be on his mind now.
The president's got so many domestic fish to fry, and that may not be a very good metaphor, actually, given what he's about to do. Quick thought?
Well, I mean, if he's about to reintroduce the death penalty, then clearly it becomes very difficult to talk about Turkey being part of the EU, and what do our diplomats do? It's clearly in their interest, in our interest, to encourage the dream, but it doesn't really look compatible with the way that things are being carried out.
So let me just briefly come on to the events in Nice, which remarkably have been overshadowed by the events in Turkey, and yet Nice only happened late on Thursday night, and this is just Sunday morning. I would suggest to you, though, that the reaction in France to Nice is now going to be very different. Charlie Hebdo, the Bataclan, brought France together. There was a great national solidarity and so on. I think this is different. It's different because people have had enough. And it's different because there are clear security questions. For example, no barrier on the promenade. We're now told there was a barrier when the military parade took place during the day, but it was removed afterwards. And already the politicians are beating up on the government. This is becoming a major pre-election issue.
That's right. The presidential elections next year, 2017, Marine Le Pen positioning herself for the National Front very, very strongly. A public divided about how to approach it, and even if this is not IS, and I'm not convinced it is, we have yet to see, it happens in the context of IS and of mass slaughter in the name of something, and it's another little chip away at our freedoms, and that is in itself a success. And they are going to continue. I believe that the rise of the right has far from peaked, and it plays absolutely into next year's presidential election. Very briefly, going back to the previous question, that all comes back into the Turkish question and the relationship with the EU and what the EU is going to look like. I mean, we really are in a state of flux. You're, forgive me, Andrew, old enough to know that for years everybody says, oh, it's never been as bad as now, and it's always been untrue.
Yes.
It is actually more complicated and in a state of flux than I have ever known it, and you may agree.
No, I do agree. Yeah. It's absolutely right. Tim Marshall, thank you.
Thank you.
I've been getting away with it all